Shabbat Shalom. All right, so we're going to cover today Parashat Tetzave, which means command. It's going to cover Exodus 27:20 to 30:10. As always, we start with a blessing. Baruch hu Adonai haborach, baruch Adonai borach leolam vaed, baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bacha banu mikol ha'amim ונתן לנו את תורתו, baruch ata Adonai noten ha'torah. All right, so we're going to cover a couple of topics. We're going to start with the menorah, kind of some general information about it. Then the priestly garments and what do they represent? What does this mean? What is special about them? A little bit. It's kind of going to be kind of superficial. Not going to go into the nitty-gritty details. And then we're going to talk about incense. Is kind of the part that's most interesting to me personally. It's really cool. And the mincha prayer, which is kind of tied to the incense. So it's kind of like one bulk thing. So first, we're going to do a little overview of the parasha. So it starts talking about the command to Moses to collect the pure oil from the Israelites to keep the menorah's everlasting flame burning daily from evening till morning. There's a lot of discussions as to when the menorah was lit, when it wasn't, how many were lit at a time. It's a whole thing. There's a lot of opinions. We just know it was lit sometime every day. So it was daily. Now, as to when specifically, there's different opinions, so we're not going to go into those. But anyway, so they had to have special oil for it. And it also talks about the priestly garments. Every regular priest had 4 different garments. So they had the ketonet, which was like the linen tunic, the long one. Then they had the michnasayim, which was the pants. The mitznefet, which was like the turban. And then the avnet, which was the sash. That was like the standard priestly garment. Obviously, the high priest had fancier ones. So aside from all of those, the high priest also had the ephod, which was like this part, and then the choshen, so it was a breastplate with all the different tribes. Then he had the me'il, which was the cloak or the coat, and then he had the tzitz, which was the plate on the top where it says holy to the Lord. And then this parasha also talks about the initiation of the priests. It talks in detail how the priests were instituted into their job. So it's not like they just got up one day and they just started working. There was a whole process of getting them initiated into the priesthood. It's not like they got chosen and they started the next day. So there was a whole process and a whole thing, and that goes to show just how they were chosen. And a lot of people, they like to be like, oh, priesthood of Melchizedek and all those inventions, but those people never went through any process to be legitimized as priests, whereas Aaron's sons, they did. And then in the end, it talks about the golden altar. So it's the instructions for building it, and that's where the incense is given. But basically, if we want to summarize the whole parasha, it basically focuses on the sanctification of the priests and the role in serving in the sanctuary, along with other details about the sanctuary, but that's the main idea. And you're going to notice that in the next few parashiot, up to pretty much the end of Leviticus, it's going to be a lot focused on the temple. So what is the point of the temple? Like, why don't we need the temple? Like, the whole Torah, half of it is about the temple. Most commandments, like around 45%, kind of like that. Something like that. Around half of the commandments have to do with the temple, so what's the big deal, right? So do you guys remember what the temple represents? What place does it represent? Yes, exactly. So it represents Gan Eden, Eden. Very, very nice, luscious, beautiful garden. And basically, when Adam was first created, he was created and God put him in Eden. So Adam was inside the circle. So he was in the realm of life, where holiness was, in order. He was in Eden. So Eden represents the realm of life. Everything in Eden was life. Adam had eternal life. He didn't die. And basically, everything that's right with the world. But then somebody decided to eat fruit that they weren't supposed to eat. So that's great. They ruined everything. And so now they had to wear clothes, which means that we have to do laundry because of sin. So anyways, they were thrown out of the garden, and then they were sent eastward, right? So whenever there's any sort of exile, it goes from west to east. And it actually mentions specifically that Adam's and then some of his sons, how they went towards the east. So it's really interesting how it's very specific. And then, like, for example, the Babylonian exile, it was towards the east. So, and then that has to do with the placement of the temple, because the temple, think of my phone as a temple, it would have been like this. So as you get closer to God's presence, it will go to the west, but if you leave the temple, it will go to the east. So it's like a rectangle, like facing that way. So if Adam, so where's Adam now? Is he inside of the circle or outside the circle? He's very much outside the circle. And by default, we're outside the circle, obviously, so that's why we have to do laundry, and that's why we die. So we went from the realm of life to the realm of death. And the desert represents the realm of death. It represents exile and chaos and everything that's not good with the world. So the temple is basically like a way to recreate Eden and like have another Eden like back in the earth. So that's why a lot of times there's going to be a lot of laws that are not going to make a lot of sense with regard to the temple. And we're like, but why do I have to, for example, when a woman gives birth, why does she have to go through purification process? When somebody touches a dead person, why do they have to go through a whole ritual, right? Because the temple can't have any connection to death because it's Eden, it's the realm of life, right? So it's not that giving birth is a sin. It's not that touching a dead person is a sin because sometimes it just happens by mistake. It's not like you do it on purpose. It's not a sin. It's just to keep God away from death because that God can have no connection to death. Just like in Eden, there was no connection to death. So with that in mind, we're going to look a little bit at the menorah. So the menorah, as keeping with the theme that the temple represents Eden, the menorah is kind of like the tree of life, and it represents the tree of life. And the menorah, it was over 5.5 feet tall, so taller than me. And then the cups of the menorah, they were shaped like almond flowers. It's really interesting. It mentions how it's mishukadim. There's another theory that word can mean hammered, so take it with a grain of salt. But it's either hammered or with almond flowers. Just almond flowers seems cuter, so we're just gonna go with almond flowers through today. And the menorah was cleared in the morning. So if you guys remember, in the temple, they used to have an offering that was done every single day. The tamid offering, it used to be one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So that's basically what opens and closes the temple service, basically. So think of whenever, if you guys have worked in a store, the one that opens and the one that closes, that's going to be the one that opens the shift and the one that closes the shop, basically. So the menorah ashes were cleared in the morning. When they were lit, how many were lit? There's so many opinions. So yeah, I asked Rico last year and like, there's different opinions. He doesn't even have like a 100% one. So it was lit at some point. That's what we know. And it was done daily also. So, and then who got to clear the ashes of the menorah, right? So they actually did this with a lottery. So basically they would round up the priests and then each priest would hold up 1 or 2 fingers behind their back. And then they would start counting one person. And the guy would pick a number, and then they would start counting. It was a whole thing. But basically...
Can you do like a live example?
Actually?
I mean, for people who haven't seen it.
Okay, sure. All right, let's do that. So who wants to volunteer for the
How about
Levitical?
This row right here with a bunch of people?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, come on. Let's do it. All right.
How many fingers does it have to be? What's the max?
It's 1 or 2.
1 or 2,
Yeah.
right?
All right, so get in a circle. All right. All right, so without me looking, hold up 1 or 2 fingers behind your backs, okay? So now I'm gonna think of a number, right? So, okay, I thought of a number. So I'm gonna think of a number. So then what I start is I'm gonna take off your turban. Imagine you have a turban, right? So you take it off. Taking off your turban. And now I'm gonna count that number that I have in my head according to your guys' fingers. So now show your fingers. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. See, so I thought of 7. So then I count your fingers until I get to 7, right? So now you get to clear the ashes of the tamid, maybe, something like that. So that's basically how they did it. And they did that for every job, pretty much every job in the temple. So you guys can go back. Thank you. Let's go.
Can you explain why they did that? Why
Yes. So, all right. So that was basically so that God could be the one that chose, right? So as you saw, I couldn't really pick someone that I felt like picking. I couldn't like, you know, I want to give it to Hannah because I feel like she should be doing that. Even though she's a girl, she can't do it. But anyways, in theory, you know, I can't pick somebody because I want to pick them that day, right? So God would be the one that picked it, right? Because it's totally up to chance or up to God. So that's how they would do it. They would do that for every job. So that's the whole thing. And then they would do that at least 4 times a day. I think they would do it exactly 4 times a day with 4 different groups, for the morning. And then sometimes people that got jobs in the morning, they would get it in the evening. It's a whole system. That's basically the gist of it. So in order to get the job of clearing the menorah, you had to go through that, and then you had to pick it. And then, so after the person would get picked, then, and after the whole service started, they would have tweezers to remove like the old mesh, the older wick, from the middle of the lamp that had gone out. So they would take it out, and then they would clear the inside of the cups. This is basically to get the idea of how intricate the service is. Obviously not to remember all these little details. And then the middle lamp, this is interesting, was lit from the Esh Tamid. So the outer altar in the temple had a fire that was always burning, right? So the middle lamp of the menorah had to be lit from that fire specifically. If you guys, did anybody here watch the movie about the destruction of the temple last year? Yes? Okay. So if you guys remember, there's this one scene where it's like you just see the smoke and then it goes out, and that's where like you need therapy because it's so sad. So if you guys watch the movie, it's really sad because it's like it's just a scene, and it's just that basically. You just see the smoke and you see it going away. So when the temple was destroyed, that's when you know like it's gone, we're done. Like when that's done, everything's done. Because it was really important that always had to be lit. So the middle branch of the menorah had to be lit from that one. And then the other ones you could light it from the middle one, but the middle had to be from that one. And then there was special oil for the menorah. So only oil from olives pressed without weight. It's a very specific process. It was the first pressings for lighting. It was very fancy oil. Think about like extra virgin olive oil, super fancy, cold press, super organic, the best oil, the best of the best was used for the menorah. And then the wicks for the menorah was actually made from the top part of the priestly garments because they wouldn't throw them away. They would actually use those for the menorah. So everything was reused. And then the bottom ones, they would use it for another type of candle. But yeah, so it was really cool. And then clearing and refilling the menorah is one of the mitzvot in the Torah. It's actually a commandment. And then the relighting of the menorah was done every single day, even on Shabbat and even on Yom Kippur, just like the korbanot. So basically, what I want you guys to get from this is that everything in the temple is done with order, right? So we didn't light the menorah whenever they felt like it, even though we don't know exactly when that was. We didn't pick whoever we wanted. Everything, God was the one that chose it. We didn't have any oil that we felt like, so you couldn't just get canola oil and put it there. You had to get the best olive oil. Everything was done with order. Even the wicks for the menorah was done with the priestly clothing that was already used. So everything was done in order. That's like the main message of the temple. And so now we're going to look a little bit at the priestly garments and kind of what do they represent. So in the ancient Near East, and pretty much in today, nowadays, clothing can represent honor. So clothing indicates social roles. It establishes social worth. It's a symbol of economic status, and is an emblem of political status. So think about it. If somebody's wearing Gucci, you're probably going to think they're going to have either a lot of money or it's fake and they're really cheap. But probably that they have a lot of money, right? So when you have fancy clothing, you're indicating your status. Or sometimes when somebody works at construction, they're going to wear certain clothes for construction. Or when somebody goes to a very fancy event, they're going to wear a suit. And if they don't, they're signaling something to you, right? So a lot of times we signal something with our clothes, depending on what we wear. So what was the role of Aaron and his sons? All right, so the Aaronic priests, they were the intermediaries between God and the people, right? So they were the ones that approached God for us. So we couldn't just go into the temple and do whatever we wanted. They were the ones that did that job for us. So they were not what they wanted, but they were the ones that were the intermediaries between us and God. So the clothing that they wore, it represented that. And it represented that they have this office, right? So when somebody works in construction, they're going to dress a certain way. Imagine if somebody shows up to construction wearing that thing on the right, it's not really going to be, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And same thing vice versa. You're not going to show up to like a coronation and construction outfit, right? And it looks really weird. So whenever we wear certain clothing, it signals our status or it signals our jobs, right? So the priests, whenever they would go and they would officiate, their clothes, they represented their status. And if they did the job without the proper clothing, their job, supposedly according to this book, it's a very good book, Rico recommended it, and it says that their service was invalid if they weren't wearing their priestly garments. So it's really, really interesting how important that was. You guys remember what kind of covenant the priesthood was? Yes? Yes, exactly. It was a royal grant. And so are royal grants permanent? Yes, exactly.
What is a royal grant?
What is a royal grant?
I've never heard of it.
Benjamin, do you remember what a royal grant is? It's okay. So a royal grant was something that a person would give to someone who was loyal to them. And it was permanent. So it could be land. In this case, it's not really land. In this case, it's the priesthood. And it was a covenant, right? So when Pinchas, he was loyal to God, he was given a royal grant forever. So he was granted the priesthood forever for all his descendants. So yes, the royal grants are permanent. So leolam, or olam. You hear this word a couple of times. You hear this one when it talks about Phineas, whenever he gets the priesthood. So basically it's forever and ever. So then that brings to mind a word called encroach. So encroachment, it's English, it's not Hebrew. So encroachment is basically to trespass. So you're trespassing on something. So if you have a very nice, pretty kitchen, then there's a roach, then that roach is encroaching, right? So it's encroachment. It's not supposed to be there, right? The kitchen is for humans who are clean, not for roaches. Yes.
The house came with the roach.
What?
The house came with the roach. You were trespassing technically.
Well, that's true, but we're gonna ignore that. So is this roach supposed to be here? No. What's it doing? It's encroaching. So if you have a beautiful, beautiful library, the dream library, right? It has a roach.
School's problem.
Yeah. Also that, but it's encroaching, right? So if we have someone named Jeff in the order of Melchizedek, right? It's made up. It's not of the Aaronic line. He's just decided that he's in the order of Melchizedek because he feels in his heart that that's what it is. And he goes and he tries to, give incense or turn on the menorah or like clear the menorah. He goes to the Holy of Holies, right? To the holy place, sorry. So is he supposed to be there?
No.
Nar, exactly. So what is he doing?
Encroaching.
He's encroaching, exactly. So he's encroachment. This is a classic example of encroachment, and this is what happened to King Uzziah, who tried to give incense. And we're going to see why he tried to give incense. Why that? Why didn't he try to turn on the menorah? Because incense is very special. So he tried to give incense, and obviously he got leprosy forever because he's not supposed to be there. But he was the king of Israel, right? So just because you're the king doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want, because there's roles for everything, right? So like a principal in a school can't just go teach a math class if they don't know math, right? So just because he was a king, technically he would have been, I guess, higher status than a priest, right? Because he was the king. But he wasn't supposed to go in there even though he was a king. So there's a separation of powers in that sense. So by challenging the Aaronic priesthood, God-given authority, who is Jeff actually challenging? Exactly. So God says, these are my priests, they've been anointed, and this parasha actually talks about the whole process of how they became priests. So if God chooses them, but then you go and you decide that, no, they don't matter, and I matter now, and I'm the one that gets to do everything, you're not challenging them, you're challenging God, right? Because you're challenging the person that put them there, right? So a lot of times people like to say that Yeshua took over the priesthood, or he canceled the priesthood. It doesn't talk about that. When it talks about Melchizedek, it's talking about the heavenly tabernacle, right? It's doing like a midrash type of thing. When you read about it, it reads like a midrash. It's very interesting. And there was this rabbi one time, and he was saying that and he doesn't believe in Yeshua or anything, but he was saying whoever wrote the book of Hebrews knows Jewish midrash. It's just a very classic style of midrash. So it's really interesting how people take that to go against the temple, when the whole point of that letter was supposed to tell you, hey, don't worry, the temple's gonna get destroyed, but everything's gonna be fine. We'll go through this, because it was written when the temple was destroyed. But anyways, let's not go down that rabbit hole. So again, temple is order. So if you have anybody going into the temple doing whatever they want, is that order?
No.
Nope. So if you have encroachment like Jeff, is that orderly?
No.
Exactly. So there's no order in that. So the importance of the temple is order. And that's the same thing with the Torah. So the Torah gives us order in our life. If we submit to a certain order, everything's going to be in order. Everything's going to be fine. All right, so now we're going to talk about the incense. It's kind of the point of the whole theme. So we see in Exodus 30:7 to 9. If anybody could run and read this for me.
Aaron must burn fragrant incense on the altar every morning when he tends the lamps. He must burn incense again when he lights the lamps at twilight, so incense will burn regularly before the Lord for the generations to come.
Exactly. So he has to put incense every single day on the altar, every morning and in the afternoon. So every single day, remember how we were talking about the different services in the temple? So there's the one that opens the service and the one that closes the service. So in those two services, they would put incense on the incense altar. There were several hundred pounds produced every single year. How many pounds? I'm not sure. There's a bunch of opinions, but several hundred. Okay, so it can be at least 100 pounds, the very, very tiniest amount. But one of the ones that I had seen was like around 500 pounds. So yeah, every single year for the temple, because they had to burn it every single day, twice a day, and then on Yom Kippur it was a whole bunch more. So it's really interesting. And then there was actually a special family that knew how to make the incense. So not everybody knew how to make the incense. And it's actually forbidden to like copy the incense in the Bible. So if anybody sells you this is the incense and they want to sell it to you, which I've seen it online. Yeah. So what is that? Fraud and encroachment. Exactly. Because who's supposed to make the incense? The house of Rabtinas. Exactly. So that specific family is the one that knows how to make it, and they're Levites.
Didn't
Yes.
something happen to them? I'm asking you. Actually asking.
That sounds familiar. I think.
There was like a huge like debacle with them, and they were the only ones that knew how to make it, and I forgot what it was. I thought you might know. I forgot.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard something like that, but I don't know. Yeah, something to look up later. But yes, and so these people, they were the one that knew how to make the incense. So we don't get to make the incense because we're not priests, right? Because that would be encroachment. Literally, I looked up because I was trying to find the ingredients to put it in the teaching. I didn't end up putting it because I didn't find them. But I tried to find the ingredients, and I was like, oh, ingredients for the incense to see what it was. And it was literally like, I saw this bottle, and it was like, oh, Jerusalem incense. And I was like, what?
Oh, it's probably Jerusalem.
Yeah, exactly. It's not really, yeah.
It's close.
Yes. But yeah, anyways, so scary. Don't buy that. Anyways, so this is the Gemara. If you guys remember, we have the Mishnah. So the Mishnah was written around a little bit after Yeshua's time, but it was already kind of written. It was just compiled after. And afterwards is the Gemara. The Gemara is basically the commentary on that. So basically, it's like a temple manual, and it talks about a lot of legal rulings. So think about kind of like the Supreme Court rulings just pulled up in one book. Kind of a tutorial, yes. Tutorial on life, tutorial on temple, a little bit of everything. There's a lot there. It's crazy. So anyway, so in the Gemara, it mentions that no person ever performed the service of incense twice. They actually tried to make sure that whoever was in the lottery, so you guys remember the lottery, right? So if I was gonna do the lottery for the incense, they would pick people that haven't done the incense ever to make sure that everybody at least gets to do it once in their lifetime. So it was really cool, and people actually would wait for that. And then here it mentions, one rabbi says that it's because it brings wealth to the person who performs it. It's a very special service, and people would wait their whole lives to do it. And so whenever they would do the lottery for that, the other lotteries, they would do them random, depends on the lottery. But for that lottery, they would pick people that haven't done incense. So for example, if Hannah, again, if you were a guy, and Jaden and Benjamin, you haven't done incense, we would pick you guys to make sure you guys get to do it. Because the priests wouldn't be in the temple all the time. It would just be 2 weeks a year. So, you gotta give people a chance. So if this was the incense lottery, those people probably never did incense before in their lives. So then this is why we see in Luke 1:8, so when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot. So he did this, right? So a lot of times we read the New Testament and we don't consider the temple context of it, but specifically in Luke, there's a lot of temple stuff, and it just gives you a lot more of understanding of what actually happened. So he was chosen by lot according to the custom of the priesthood to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense, right? So probably he'd never done this before. This was probably the first time he ever got to do this, because he was probably one of the ones that never got to do it, and they picked him special to give him that job. And there mentions his division. So in the temple, there was families, and they would rotate. So like every family would go 1 week a year, and then some special times too. So it's not like they were in the temple all the time. It was just by family. So, and then keep this in mind, because we're going to talk about this later too. So just keep it in mind. But yeah, really cool. He was chosen by Lot. It mentions it there. So we know how that was done. So fun fact. All right, so the incense, if you guys remember, there was two services. In these services, there was a lamb brought, and they would bring a grain offering. They would also offer incense. So it's like a whole thing. They would turn on the menorah. They would clear the menorah. It was like basically how the temple would start running, right? So the opening and the closing of the temple. There was nothing done after, except for in Passover. The Passover was done after this one, but that's the only time of year you're going to have anything after, all right? So they would bring incense in the morning and in the afternoon. And then this would be around 9 a.m.-ish, and then the other one will be around 3 p.m.-ish, depends on the time of the year. So like according to how much the sun is out, basically. So you know how sometimes in the winter the days are shorter, and in the summer the days are longer? So according to that, in the winter, this one might have been a little bit later, and this one a bit earlier, you know, depending on the time of the year. Think of it like priestly daylight savings. All right, so what's the point of incense? And what does it represent, right? There's a lot of explanation, a lot of different things, but this is one that's really interesting. It's mentioned in a couple of books. And to find that out, we're gonna go and talk about the mincha. So the best time for supplication, question, what? All right, so this is based on a paper by Moshe Weinfeld. In other words, it'd be legit. It's in Hebrew. I couldn't find the English one, but it's really good. It's really short. And it's really interesting. And he mentions a lot of verses. Just all those numbers are just verses. All right. So when is the mincha prayer? You guys know?
After midday.
Yes, exactly. So what we just did a couple hours ago, well, maybe like 2 hours ago, that was a mincha prayer. So the mincha prayer is the afternoon prayer, right? So it's in the afternoon. So nowadays it's around, you can do it at any time, basically after 12 before it's night, kind of around that time. And there's like different categories of mincha, but you know, in the afternoon basically. And so that's the time that mincha would be done. And the reason that mincha is around that time is because that's when they would bring that offering. So whenever we pray in the morning in Judaism, there's 3 prayers. There's a prayer in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the night. But the night one was actually installed afterwards. And that's why it's not like as super mandatory, even though nowadays it is for them. Like, you know, for in halachic terms. But the morning and the evening and the afternoon were the more important ones because they're supposed to emulate the temple. So obviously when the temple got destroyed, you know, what's the nation gonna do, right? We're like, we have no temple, we have no sacrifices, what are we gonna do? We're gonna pray, right? So that's why you see the Siddur, and it's so important and it's so like cherished because it's supposed to emulate the temple. It's like basically the only thing we can do now, right? Because we don't got no temple, so we can at least pray, right? So, but what does mincha actually mean, right? So remember, mincha is a prayer we do in the afternoon, right? So what does mincha mean? So mincha is, it can be translated to grain offering, gift, a present, but it's usually kind of like a tribute or a gift, all right? So tribute or gift, that's basically the translation of it. But the mincha was actually one of the 5 offerings that was brought in the temple. It could be given voluntarily. It was also required with some animal offerings. It was made out of flour, oil, and frankincense. You guys know what frankincense is? Yes.
Monster. I'm just kidding.
So yeah, so frankincense, if you've seen, and if your moms have essential oils, they probably have frankincense. So yes, it's a very fancy essential oil. It's actually smells good, unlike other essential oils. It smells really nice. It's kind of like a perfume. Think about it, a perfume. And in that day, people didn't really have perfume, so this is their perfume basically. So it smells really nice. And then imagine if you have the temple and you have, you know, sacrifices of animals and stuff. It's probably not going to smell great. So this definitely helps out. All right. So the mincha offering, remember how we have the morning and the afternoon offerings? They would actually also bring mincha with that, right? So there was a lamb, there was a mincha offering, there was an incense, basically everything. It was like the mini services for the morning and the evening. But notice how we call our afternoon prayer mincha, but not the morning one, right? So the morning one is shacharit, the one in the morning. Well, why don't we call this one mincha if we brought mincha in the afternoon, in the morning also, right? Makes no sense. So that. All right. So from ancient times, this is according to that article by Moshe Weinfeld, the word mincha took on the meaning of an offering that rises in smoke and appeases God. So a lot of times incense is going to be kind of like something that appeases God. And in the ancient Near East, this is something that they understood. So if we see a couple of verses, now we're just going to read a bunch of verses with the examples because he cites all of them. I'm just going to read most of them. So in 1 Samuel 26:19, it says, if the Lord has incited you against me, he will accept an offering. But the word accept an offering literally says he's going to smell the mincha, right? So accepting the offering by God is just smelling the offering. So it's really interesting. And then we see in the case of Noah, when the flood went away and he made an offering, we read this verse. If anybody would like to read it for me. Yes.
The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood, and never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done.
Exactly. So the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, and then he said, you know what? I'm not going to destroy everybody again, right? So here we see like the connection between smelling the pleasing aroma of the mincha or of the offerings and then being appeased. And really interesting, he said in his heart. Why does it say he said in his heart? Because in the ancient Near East, the heart was the mind. So they didn't really think about brains in the way that we think about them. In them, they thought with the heart. So it wasn't really emotions, it was just he thought, basically. All right, so the mincha was made of grain and it was completely burnt. So remember, it had frankincense. So the frankincense, it actually gave a pleasing aroma, right? It was kind of like an incense type of thing, but it wasn't incense. All right, so mincha was elevated and brought a pleasing aroma to God every morning and every afternoon. And then when people would bring these for different offerings, people could bring this voluntarily. So these were the only ones that were done. It's just, the ones that had to be done every single day. So a lot of times the mincha, especially the evening mincha, was associated with incense, all right? So now is where it gets really interesting. So we see in Psalm 141:2, where it says, may my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting of my hands be like the evening sacrifice, right? So he's making a connection between prayer and incense. So my prayer be set before you like incense, and my hands be like the evening sacrifice. So if you guys remember, this will be the evening sacrifice. So it says like when you like lift your hands, it's like when you're pleading to God. So may the lifting of my hands be like the evening sacrifice and like incense. So I have put that there. All right, and then incense, it has the connotation of appeasing God. So then we see in this verse, this is where there was a huge plague among the people. A bunch of people were dying because, again, they were like sinning and being horrible. But there was a big plague, and Aaron took things and fixed them. So if anyone wants to read that for me too.
I'll read it.
Thank you.
So Aaron took the burning censer as Moses commanded and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on the incense and made atonement for the people.
Exactly. So this was a very like chaotic and tumultuous time. So he put the incense and it appeased God, and the plague stopped, right? So you're getting the idea where I'm going with this? It's really interesting. And then so the time of the evening incense, then it was considered a good time for a prayer of confession and of supplication. Remember, there was incense brought in the evening sacrifice and in the morning sacrifice. So it was considered that was good time to pray, because evening, the incense is kind of like appeases God, and it's kind of like represents the prayers. And we're going to see that in Second Temple literature. So if you guys have seen a story, like any regular story, there's, the typical rising action, then you get to the climax, and then the falling action, resolution. So if you think about the offerings in the morning and in the afternoon, Moshe Weinfeld says that the offering of incense and the mincha was like the climax of the whole thing. So then the hour chosen to bring the mincha was considered a time of favor, right? So if you guys remember, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about theophanies and about how, when people have experiences where they see God or representatives of God and things like that. So if you remember from Isaiah 6, where he sees, crazy vision, is really interesting. But we're going to read that with this in mind. If anybody wants to read this.
I'll read it again.
Thank you.
Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces. With 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke.
What kind of smoke? Incense. Yes, exactly. So Moshe Weinfeld makes a connection, and he says that in this case, it was filled with incense, And then he mentions that it's connected to the time of the prayer because they were offering incense and then the angels were praying. And then this is what we see in the afternoon prayer when we say Kadosh, 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 we go like this. This is that. So we're emulating the angels that were praying during the same time. Yes.
Don't we see that in Revelation too?
Yes, I'm pretty
The
sure.
censer filled with the prayers of the people.
Yes, I'm going there. Yes. All right. So what is smoke? Incense. And then, so the fact that the time of the evening incense was burnt was a good time for prayer is actually mentioned a lot, specifically in books after the Babylonian exile. So we're going to start off with this one. This is before that. But this one, it says, "But I pray to you, Lord, in the time of your favor, with your great love, O God, answer me with your sure salvation." So what is the time of your favor, right? So Moshe Weinfeld says that the time of your favor is the evening incense. And it's the one we say before we start praying. So Vani tefilati, tefilati. So that one. That's the one that's said there. And then that's what it says et ratzon. So et ratzon is a time of favor. And then we see this long one. So this is where Elijah, he was having this, fight with the Baal priests. And the Baal priests were like, you know what? Our God is the best, whatever. He's really cool. And then he was like, no, your God sucks. He eats and has to sleep and has to go to the bathroom. He was literally mocking them. So, he wasn't respecting other religions. Anyways, so basically God showed himself and he was like, yeah, I'm God. And then he burnt this wet thing, the wet log, I think it was, right? Was it log? A log?
You talking about the altar?
Yeah.
Then there was,
It's
wet wood. It was
something like that.
soaked 5 times.
Yeah. So basically it shouldn't have caught fire, but it did. So basically God just showed that he is God and not bad. If anybody wants to read this one.
Pick lots.
Okay.
And it was when the evening sacrifice was offered that Elijah the prophet came near and said, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and at your word have I done all these things. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, and the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God."
Exactly. So Elijah waited until they were doing the mincha offering to pray. And then God answered him. So it's really interesting because, and it was when the evening offering, he says when the mincha was being raised. And then is that he prayed. And he prayed in supplication. So it's really interesting that it specifically mentions that. And then we see in Daniel 9:20-23 another theophany, right? So you're noticing a pattern here. So he says, "While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my request to the Lord my God for his holy hill, while I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in an earlier vision," Gabriel is an angel, "came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and said, 'Daniel, I have come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out, which I come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed, and therefore consider the word and understand the vision.'" And then he has a whole vision, a whole theophany. So it's really interesting because, again, it specifically mentioned it was about the time of the evening sacrifice. So you're seeing a pattern here. And then Judith is a book, Yehudit is a book from the time of the Maccabees. It's supposed to be a story that happened during that time. Didn't get into the canon, but it's very well known. And it's well known from that period of time. So we see again where she fell prostrated. Then Judith prostrated herself, put ashes on her head, and uncovered the sackcloth she was wearing. At the very time when the evening incense was being offered in the house of God in Jerusalem, Judith cried out to the Lord with a loud voice and said, and then it mentions her whole prayer. So she prayed during that specific time. And then we also see it with Daniel where he was praying. He would pray 3 times a day in Babylon, and that's how he got caught and things like that. So it's really interesting. And then we see in Ezra 9:5-6. If anyone would like to read this one.
Then at the evening sacrifice, I rose from my self-abasement with my tunic and cloak torn, and fell on my knees with my hands spread out to the Lord my God, and prayed, "I am too ashamed and disgraced, my God, to lift up my face to you, because our sins are higher than our heads, and our guilt has reached to the heavens.
Exactly. So they actually say this one during the Slichot, before Yom Kippur, you know, the prayers a month before Yom Kippur. We say that's part of what is said. So again, he waited around the evening sacrifice. It says evening sacrifice, but it's kind of like the afternoon sacrifice, because in Hebrew, evening is like pretty much now is like evening-ish, okay? So again, he waited to that time, and then he prayed. So it's really interesting. All these people are praying at the same time. And then we see in Luke 1:8-13, the one that we were talking about, Zechariah. So he sees that once Zechariah's division was on duty, he was serving as priest before the Lord, and he was chosen by lot. Now we know how that's done, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time came for the burning of the incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. So people would have a custom of praying outside the temple, specifically during that time. And so they were waiting, and then when the time of burning incense came, everybody went outside and went to pray. And then an angel of the Lord appeared to him. So what is this?
Theophany.
Yes, exactly, a theophany. So then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled, and he was gripped with fear. Remember we were talking about the theophanies, that people usually get scared when they see it? So we see the same pattern here. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard." But when was it heard? During the evening incense, right? So during the afternoon incense, and his prayer was heard, and then his wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him Yochanan. So that's really, really interesting, and it mentions how everybody was praying during that time. So everybody would assemble outside and pray. And then Moshe Weinfeld was mentioning in that article how, like, you remember how there was two offerings? So people will usually go to pray in the afternoon one. So really interesting. And then we see Revelation 5:8. It says, when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. So here we see, like, it pretty much brings everything full circle, just makes the whole connection. So the incense is the prayers of God's people. So our prayers are as if it were an incense. And then we see again in Revelation 8:3, it says, another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of God's people on the golden altar in front of the throne. That's really interesting. Again, it's making a direct connection between the incense and the prayers. And then if you see in the Siddur, there's some Siddurs do it, some don't, but there's a lot of Siddurs where before the afternoon prayers, they're actually going to have the verses from this week where it says the instructions for incense. And people sometimes, instead of, like, before starting to pray, they read the portion of the incense, and then they start praying. So it just, again, it shows, like, the whole connection between that. And then the prayer, obviously, when we start the prayers here, before we start the Amidah, we talk about the incense and, you know, the good time for prayer and everything. So it just kind of brings everything together. And then this is from the Talmud, and it actually mentions, again, another part in Nehemiah, where it says, like, during a fourth part of the day, they were reading the Torah, and then during another fourth of part of the day, they confessed. And then he makes a connection in the article about how this is also around that time of the evening sacrifice. And then in Berachos, another Talmudic tractate, it mentions how Rabbi Chelbo said that Rav Huna, so it's basically they're quoting, it's very oral, like the oral transmission. So they're quoting a rabbi who said one must always be vigilant with regard to the afternoon prayer, as Elijah's prayer was only answered in the afternoon prayer. See, so it's really interesting. And then he quotes what we were reading earlier. So because Elijah was answered in the afternoon prayer, it has particular significance. And we don't only see that in Elijah, we see that in Elijah and in a bunch of other cases, as we've seen. So again, the temple represents order. Prayer time is kind of another way of having order, right? If you have like a set time, you know, during the day, you don't have to do anything crazy. But you know, these people, they had like the time, they were like, okay, this is a good time to pray. Let me make the most out of it. So Siddur, the word Siddur actually comes from order. So fun fact. And obviously you can pray whenever you want, like, you know, anytime you want, that, you know, within reason, obviously. But the Bible doesn't say you have to pray during a specific time or not. It's just good times to pray. Like in the afternoon, you would see a pattern of people making petitions during the afternoon. So that's really interesting. But obviously, you know, whenever you guys want. If you don't have time in the afternoon, it's okay. But yeah, it's really interesting. So just to review everything, the temple represents Eden. And we saw how the temple represents the realm of life. And we saw the menorah actually represents the tree of life. And a lot of the elements inside the temple, they're going to have to do with the garden and with the Garden of Eden. And you see when Solomon was building the temple, he made a lot of decoration that looked like a garden and things like that. And then the covenant of the priesthood with Aaron is permanent. So if somebody decides to bring incense because, they feel it in their heart and they like to pray in the afternoon and they go to the temple in the order of Melchizedek, what are they doing? Encroaching, exactly. So don't be a roach. Don't encroach, okay? So encroachment basically is trespassing. You're going where you're not supposed to be. It's not your job. And also, I don't know what the big deal is about like wanting to be priests in the order of Melchizedek. Do you know how hard the priests work? Like, it's a lot. They had to be ritually pure. They had a lot, they needed to know a lot of rules. It was a big job. So it's kind of like, just leave it to them. You'll be better off, like, especially for a girl. I don't have to worry about that, okay? Like, they do it for me. That's good. It's okay. So then we have incense, which represents the prayers of the people. And then we saw, obviously, a bunch of examples of that. And then we saw the many instances of people making petitions in the afternoon prayer. And if you look in the Siddur, the afternoon prayer is really short, actually. So it's really, really, really short. Like, you can get through it in like 10 minutes. Like, it's really short, but it's really interesting. And like, if you guys have the Siddur, look through it and you'll see like some of the verses about the incense. It's really interesting. And just like God accepted all those prayers during the time of incense, may He accept our prayer and rebuild the temple soon in our days. Amen. So, Shavuot Tov.